The stars over Tirana were always a sight to behold, yet Alaric Roth barely noticed them anymore. The vast, open sky had become a constant backdrop to his humble life as a farmer. He had come to love the simplicity of it all. The rustling of the wind to the tall crops, the rhythmic sound of his plow cutting into the rich soil, the endless horizon where the world met the sky. The galaxy had its chaos, its wars, its struggles. But here, in the rolling fields of Tirana, he had found peace. Or so he thought. That peace was shattered one evening when the skies above began to ripple. At first, it was just a flicker, a glint that Allard dismissed as a shooting star. But the flicker intensified, growing into something far more tangible. His instincts, honed from years of living on a frontier world, kicked into gear. Something was wrong. He dropped the shovel, wiping the sweat from his brow, and squinted into the horizon. The sky above him shimmered like a living thing, a shimmering wave of energy that parted the air like liquid. Then, with a deafening roar, a ship, sleek in silver blue, pierced through the atmosphere. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. Too smooth, too refined, almost alien in its design. It streaked toward the ground with a grace that defied its size, its thrusters hissing and flickering with power as it descended. Instinct told Alaric to grab his rifle. The simple farming tools had served their purpose well, but his old weapon, a relic of a time when Tirana had faced more than just the rigors of farming, was his only defense now. He sprinted toward the clearing where the ship had landed, heart pounding in his chest, his breath sharp and cold in the evening air. The ship's descent slowed as it neared the ground, hovering for a moment before touching down with a soft hum. The ground trembled slightly beneath Alaric's boots as the ramp lowered with a hiss of hydraulics. He stood at the edge of the clearing, his rifle raised in caution, his eyes locked on the figures emerging from the craft. They were tall, their movements smooth and calculated, almost ethereal. The first of them was a woman, her skin pale lavender, her hair dark as the night sky, cascading down her back in a glossy wave. She was an alien. That much was undeniable, but she had an otherworldly beauty that, despite the situation, drew Alaric's gaze. Her features were sharp and regal, and her silver eyes, like twin moons, caught his in a steady, unblinking stare. Behind her, two others emerged, one a towering male, broad and armored, the other a slender figure with bright green eyes and a fluid grace. But it was the woman, the leader, who caught his attention. She took a step forward, her voice smooth like silk, but laced with a sharp edge. "Human," she said, "I need your assistance." Alaric's finger tightened on the trigger, though he didn't fire. There was something about her, something that told him she wasn't here to destroy, at least, not immediately. "Assistance," he growled, his voice gravelly from the dust. "What do you want with me?" The alien woman didn't flinch at his aggression. Instead, she studied him with an intensity that made him feel small, as though she was seeing through him. "You have something we need. Human nectar." Alaric's brow furrowed, his grip on the rifle loosening slightly, though his suspicion remained. "Nectar? What are you talking about?" She stepped closer, her gaze never leaving his. "The essence of your kind," she explained. "The substance you produce. It is vital to our survival. We need it." Alaric's mind raced. He had heard of alien species before. Species with strange needs, strange customs. But this was something new, something disturbing. He looked her over again, noticing the subtle but undeniable strength in her posture. This wasn't a simple request for help, it was a demand. "You came all the way out here for that?" he asked, the confusion in his voice tinged with a hint of anger. "I don't know what kind of games you're playing, but I'm not giving you anything." The alien woman tilted her head slightly, as though considering his words. "I understand your hesitation," she said softly, "but you misunderstand. It is not just a request. It is a necessity for us, for my people. Without it, we will die." Alaric's fingers tightened around the rifle. His thoughts raced. "Why don't you just take it? You're in no position to be asking." A flash of something passed across the woman's face, something between frustration and resolve. We do not extract what is needed in such a way. We must follow the old traditions, the old methods. Alaric blinked. The old methods? What does that mean? Her expression softened, as though she was trying to convey an idea he could understand. You are not the first human we have encountered, but you are the last of your kind in this sector, and it is you who has been chosen. Chosen for what? Alaric's voice dropped to a growl. What do you want from me? The alien woman stepped closer, close enough now that Alaric could feel her presence, cold, commanding, and undeniably alien. We need your nectar, and we will extract it the old-fashioned way. Alaric didn't know what that meant, but a part of him feared he would soon find out. His mind raced, but before he could respond, something in the distance caught his eye. A ripple in the air. Another ship, smaller and more ragged than the first, emerged from the horizon. It wasn't a peaceful arrival. More! Alaric muttered under his breath, his heart skipping a beat. What the hell is going on here? The alien woman's gaze flicked to the new arrival, her silver eyes narrowing. No time for explanations. We must act quickly. Before Alaric could ask any more questions, the woman reached out, her hand moving with surprising speed, and in an instant she disarmed him. The rifle fell to the ground with a dull thud, useless in her grip. You will come with us, she said, her voice calm but firm, whether you like it or not. Alaric's mind screamed at him to resist, to run, but a strange sense of inevitability settled over him. There was no escaping what was coming. With no other option, he followed her into the craft, the door sealing behind him with a hiss. As the ship rose into the sky, the planet below him shrinking away, Alaric couldn't help but wonder if he was making a grave mistake, or if something far worse was about to unfold. And in the back of his mind, the phrase echoed. Alien girls needed human nectar and had to extract it the old-fashioned way. There was no turning back now. The inside of the alien ship was nothing like anything Alaric had ever seen. The walls were smooth, made of some metallic material that shimmered faintly with an inner light, casting strange shadows that shifted and changed like living things. The air was cool, almost sterile, and the hum of the ship's engines was a constant, low background noise. The atmosphere felt thick with something unfamiliar, an energy that left him unsettled, his muscles twitching with a primal urge to fight or flee. He was led down a narrow corridor by the alien woman, her silver eyes never leaving him, a quiet but intense gaze that made him feel like he was being weighed, measured. Her presence was overwhelming in a way that no human could ever replicate, as though she had mastered an art of controlling every moment. Where are we going? Alaric finally broke the silence, his voice rough. What is this place? The woman didn't answer immediately, her steps light and purposeful. They passed through several chambers, each filled with intricate alien technology, holographic interfaces, strange symbols flickering in the air, and machinery that seemed to hum with power. It all felt wrong to him, as though it didn't belong in the same universe as the simple, earthly existence he had built on Tirana. We are preparing for the extraction, she said simply, as though the answer was obvious. It will take place in the chamber ahead. Alaric's heart skipped a beat. Extraction. The word alone sent a chill down his spine. He had no idea what it meant, but he was certain it wasn't going to be anything pleasant. The corridor ended at a large door, taller than any human-made structure. It slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a sterile chamber bathed in pale light. The room was filled with strange equipment, long, tubular devices, glowing panels, and mechanical arms suspended in midair, as though waiting for their turn to perform some task. In the center of the room was a platform, surrounded by more of the humming machinery. Alaric felt a knot tighten in his stomach. His instinct screamed at him to turn around, to escape while he still had the chance. But the alien woman's grip on his arm tightened, pulling him toward the center of the room. Lie down, she commanded, her voice smooth but forceful. Alaric hesitated, glaring at her, but she was unwavering. Her silver eyes locked onto his, and in that moment he understood something. She wasn't asking. She was telling him. And somehow he knew it wasn't a choice. He took a deep breath and reluctantly lowered himself onto the cold, metallic surface of the platform. The moment his body touched it, the machinery around him sprang to life with a soft whir. The metallic arms extended and positioned themselves around him, their tips glinting with sharp precision. The alien woman moved to a console at the far side of the room, her fingers dancing across the glowing interface. "The process is simple," she said, her voice now strangely detached. "You will not feel anything at first, but as we proceed, you will begin to understand why your kind is so crucial to our survival." Alaric clenched his fists, his body tense. "I don't know what you're planning, but I won't make it easy for you," he spat, his eyes narrowing. The woman didn't respond. Instead, she pressed a button on the console, and the room around him seemed to vibrate with energy. The machines hummed louder, and Alaric felt a strange pull, as though something deep inside him was being tugged. It wasn't painful, not at first, but it was an odd, unsettling sensation, like his body was being analyzed, probed. The air around him grew thick with a quiet tension as the first of the metallic arms moved toward him. Alaric felt a sudden jolt, and then a cool, almost liquid sensation flowed over his skin. The machine's arm had made contact with his chest, and it seemed to be extracting something invisible but tangible. He felt his pulse quicken. "What is this?" Alaric demanded, his voice rising. "What are you doing to me?" The alien woman glanced at him with an emotionless expression. "We are harvesting your nectar. It is the only way for us to survive. The process is ancient, but it is effective." "Nectar?" Alaric hissed, his mind spinning. "You're not taking anything from me. You can't just—" "Be still," the alien woman interrupted, her tone cold and final. "You will not be harmed, not unless you resist." Alaric's muscles tensed as the extraction process deepened. A surge of warmth began to spread through his chest, then to his arms and legs. It was as though something within him was being drained, his very essence, his life force. Panic clawed at the edges of his mind. This is it. This is how they survive, by taking from us. The machines hummed louder, a low thrumming sound that reverberated deep in his bones. He could feel it now. The pull, the insistent drain, as though his energy was being siphoned away. His breath quickened and his vision blurred at the edges. His body began to feel heavy, sluggish, as though every ounce of strength was being stolen from him. "No, no!" Alaric gasped, his voice breaking with the effort. "I won't let you take it." His hands shot out, but the metallic arms around him tightened their grip. He tried to fight, tried to break free, but his limbs felt like they were made of lead. The more he struggled, the more drained he became, and the more the machine seemed to feed on his resistance. The alien woman stepped forward, her expression impassive as she observed the process. "It is futile to resist, human. You do not understand. We do not want to hurt you. We simply need this for survival. It is the only way." Alaric's vision dimmed as his strength left him. His chest tightened, and his breath came in shallow gasps. The world around him spun in dizzying circles, but through the fog of exhaustion and fear, he managed to catch her words. "We simply need this for survival." His anger flared one last time, pushing through the fog of fear and weakness. "You think you can just take it from me?" His voice was a hoarse whisper, but it was filled with defiance. "You think you can drain me and leave me nothing?" The alien woman's eyes softened, and for a moment, Alaric swore he saw something akin to regret flicker across her face. But the moment passed quickly, replaced once again by cold resolve. "You have no choice," she said softly. "This is the only way." The machines continued their work, their relentless hum filling the room. Alaric fought it with every ounce of strength he had left, but he could already feel himself slipping, his body weakening, his spirit fighting to stay awake. Then, Just as he thought he couldn't take any more, a sudden noise echoed through the chamber, a loud, reverberating thud. The machines jerked, their lights flickering wildly as the entire ship shook with a violent tremor. Alaric's heart skipped a beat. Something had gone terribly wrong. Before he could comprehend what was happening, the sound of blaster fire echoed through the ship, loud and chaotic. The alien woman froze, her eyes wide with alarm. "No!" she whispered. "Not now." The machines fell silent, the lights flickering one final time before the entire room plunged into darkness. And in that moment, Alaric realized that whatever had come for them was far worse than he could have imagined. Whatever was about to happen next, it wasn't going to end here. The ship shook violently, throwing Alaric against the cold metal platform. His breath left him in a sharp gasp, and for a moment, everything seemed to blur, his senses overwhelmed by the sudden onslaught of noise, light, and movement. The mechanical arms that had been draining his strength retracted, their once steady hum now replaced by a chaotic whine as they powered down. "What's happening?" Alaric grunted, his voice weak from the extraction. The alien woman, Seraphis, moved quickly to the control panel at the far side of the room, her silver eyes scanning the readouts with a mixture of frustration and urgency. "They're here," she muttered, her tone colder than before. "The Dread Walkers." Alaric's mind raced. The Dread Walkers? He had heard rumors of them. Mercenaries, notorious for their brutality and their penchant for taking what they wanted, by force if necessary. They were a scourge in the galaxy, and their reputation alone was enough to make even the most seasoned soldiers hesitate. Before he could gather his thoughts, another tremor rippled through the ship, followed by a loud, unmistakable crash. The entire structure groaned under the assault. Seraphis's eyes widened, and she pressed a few buttons frantically on the console, but the systems were failing. "They've breached the outer hull," she said, almost to herself. Alaric was already moving before she finished. The effects of the extraction were still weighing him down. His muscles were stiff, his limbs heavy, but the adrenaline was kicking in. He wasn't about to sit idly by while a group of mercenaries tore through the ship, especially with Seraphis so close. He had no idea what her intentions were, but it seemed clear now that his survival depended on figuring that out fast. "How do we stop them?" he barked, trying to ignore the pulsing exhaustion still running through his veins. Seraphis didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned and fixed him with a hard, piercing gaze. "You can't," she said simply. "Not alone. But I will help you." She stepped closer, her movements graceful but deliberate, and without further explanation, she activated a panel on the wall. There was a brief whir of machinery, and then a hidden door slid open, revealing a small armory stocked with various weapons, blasters, plasma grenades, and other alien technologies that Alaric had only heard of in passing. Seraphis moved toward the weapons rack, pulling out a sleek, silver blaster with an almost casual precision. "You need a weapon," she said, handing it to him. Alaric hesitated only for a moment before taking the blaster. It was lightweight but felt powerful in his hands, almost like it was made for him. He had fought before, been part of the resistance on Tirana during the early days of colonization, but this was different. This wasn't a battle over land or resources. This was about survival against an enemy who didn't care about either. "We need to get to the bridge," Seraphis said, already heading toward the door. "If we can regain control of the ship, we might have a chance." Alaric followed her, the blaster held firmly at his side, his senses heightened as the ship seemed to tremble with each new attack. The once quiet corridors were now filled with the sound of footsteps, heavy, purposeful footsteps, coming from the direction of the breach. The Dread Walkers were making their way deeper into the ship. Seraphis led him through a maze of hallways, her movements swift and calculated, but Alaric's mind was elsewhere. His body felt like it was dragging 100-pound weight behind him, and the thought of fighting through a mercenary assault when he was barely able to stand wasn't exactly comforting. Still, he gritted his teeth, willing his legs to keep moving. They passed by a maintenance shaft, The hatch cracked open slightly. Alaric noticed movement in the shadows, figures slipping by, unseen and unheard, like shadows. Before he could react, a muffled shout echoed from down the hall, followed by a burst of gunfire. Seraphis didn't flinch. She just turned to him. "Stay behind me," she ordered, her voice low but firm. Then, without another word, she sprinted forward, moving with a speed and fluidity that almost made Alaric's heart stop. In a blink, she was upon the first dread walker. The soldier didn't even see her coming. She moved too fast, too precisely. Her silver eyes flickered as her wrist flicked upward, sending a bright surge of energy from the weapon in her hand. The dread walker's chest exploded in a spray of sparks and armor fragments, the force of the blast sending him crashing to the floor. Alaric had no time to marvel at her skill. Another dread walker appeared, a hulking figure in heavy armor, his weapon drawn. He fired a series of plasma rounds in Seraphis's direction, but she dodged with an agility that defied logic. She dropped to the floor and rolled, coming up on the other side of the mercenary, all while returning fire with unerring accuracy. Alaric barely had time to aim before the dread walker's weapon was disabled, and he took the opportunity to fire. His shot landed squarely in the mercenary's side, and the soldier crumpled to the ground, his weapon still sizzling with residual energy. "Keep moving," Seraphis shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. She was already sprinting toward the next set of doors, Alaric following closely behind her. The corridors were growing more crowded with the sound of battle. Dread walkers moved swiftly, clearing the hallways in their pursuit of their prey. The ship had become a war zone, and every step was a risk. Alaric could feel his pulse pounding in his ears, the adrenaline coursing through his veins as he fought to stay on his feet. It wasn't just his life at stake now, it was his humanity's last chance. They finally reached the bridge, a large, circular room filled with holographic interfaces and control panels that flickered with light. The breach had taken its toll on the ship systems, but it was still functional enough for them to regain control, if they were quick. Seraphis was already at the console, her fingers flying across the controls. "We need to reboot the navigation systems," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "If we don't, we'll be sitting ducks." Alaric moved to cover the door, his senses heightened as he listened for any signs of movement. He wasn't sure how long they had before the dread walkers overwhelmed them completely. "Almost there," Seraphis muttered, her voice strained as she fought against the failing systems. "Come on." Suddenly, the door burst open with a loud bang, and Alaric spun around just in time to see a dread walker, tall and armored, step into the room. He raised his weapon, ready to fire. Without thinking, Alaric fired first, the blaster in his hand sending a burst of energy that hit the dread walker square in the chest. The soldier staggered back, but before he could recover, Seraphis stepped forward, her silver eyes alight with determination. With one fluid motion, she activated a hidden blade from her wristband and lunged at the mercenary. Her blade cut through his armor like butter, and with a final, decisive strike, she ended the fight. The room fell silent, the hum of the failing systems the only sound. Alaric exhaled, his hand trembling as he lowered the blaster. Seraphis stepped toward him, her gaze unwavering. "We are not out of danger yet," she said, "but we have control again." Alaric nodded, his heart still racing. For now, they were far from safe, but for the first time since the attack began, they had a fighting chance. And that, Alaric thought, was all that mattered. The bridge of the ship was eerily quiet. The faint hum of the machinery was the only sound, a constant reminder of the battle still raging outside. Alaric stood at the control console, his hands clenched tightly around the edges. His body ached from the extraction, the violence, and the exhaustion that had been building since the moment the dread walkers boarded. But there was no time to rest now. The ship was still under attack, and they weren't out of danger yet. Seraphis was at the secondary console, her movements swift and precise as she worked to stabilize the ship systems. The once pristine interface now flickered sporadically, some panels completely unresponsive. The mercenaries had torn through the ship's outer hull, disabling its defensive systems. They were holding on by a thread, but as long as the bridge was intact, they had a chance. Alaric's eyes kept darting to the view screen, where the black void of space was marred by the debris from the recent explosions. Dread Walker ships loomed like shadows in the distance, their sleek, menacing silhouettes cutting through the starlight. The attackers were relentless, and it was clear they weren't here for negotiation. They were here to kill. "We don't have much time," Seraphis said, her voice low, but filled with an intensity that cut through the tension. "If we don't get the shields back online, they'll board us again and we won't be able to stop them." Alaric nodded, forcing his body to stay alert despite the weight of fatigue that seemed to press down on him like a physical force. "Then we need to make sure they don't get any closer." Seraphis glanced over at him, her silver eyes narrowing. "You're in no condition to fight." Alaric gave a grim smile, pushing through the dizziness that threatened to cloud his vision. "I don't need to be in perfect shape to shoot back." The doors of the bridge hissed open, and Alaric whipped around, his blaster instinctively raised. But it wasn't another mercenary. Instead, a figure emerged, tall, powerful, and unmistakably alien. It was one of Seraphis's people, a dark-skinned warrior with eyes as cold as the void. "Queen Seraphis," the warrior said, bowing slightly as she entered the room. "The Dread Walkers have breached the lower decks. They are advancing rapidly." Seraphis's expression tightened. "I know. We're almost done here, but we need more time. We can't allow them to reach the control room." Alaric could see the warrior's eyes scanning him, taking in the sight of the human standing in the midst of the chaos. The warrior's gaze softened slightly when it landed on Seraphis. "We will fight, but you must prepare for what comes next. We are outnumbered." Seraphis nodded, her jaw set with determination. "Then we fight." Alaric stepped forward, his voice steady despite the tension. "I'm not just going to sit here while you fight. You need all the help you can get, and I'm not letting them take over this ship." Seraphis's eyes flickered with something that almost looked like respect, but she didn't respond immediately. Instead, she turned back to the console, tapping a sequence of commands. The ship's internal alarms began blaring, signaling that the final stage of repairs was underway. "Get to the armory," Seraphis ordered, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Take anything you can carry. The battle is about to reach us, and you'll need more than that little blaster." Alaric didn't need to be told twice. He sprinted toward the armory without a second thought. His muscles screamed in protest, but the urgency of the situation was enough to keep him moving. The ship seemed to be holding its breath, the tension palpable in every corridor, every hallway. The walls creaked and groaned as the assault from the Dread Walkers intensified. In the armory, Alaric grabbed a set of combat gear, heavy-duty armor designed to withstand the high-powered blasts of energy weapons. It wasn't the most comfortable, but it would keep him alive longer than the flimsy clothes he had on now. He loaded up on plasma grenades and an upgraded pulse rifle, the weapon heavier but far more effective than the blaster he had been carrying. He returned to the bridge, finding Seraphis and her warrior ally waiting for him. They were already outfitted for battle, and the look in their eyes said everything. There was no turning back now. "Ready?" Seraphis asked, her voice steady but carrying an edge of urgency. Alaric nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. "Ready." They moved quickly, taking positions at the bridge's primary defense points. The countdown for the shield reboot was almost complete, and the doors to the bridge locked with a resounding thud. But there was no mistaking the sound of approaching boots. Heavy, metallic, and unmistakably the Dread Walkers. A loud explosion rattled the ship's hull, followed by a series of thumping impacts. The Dread Walkers were here. Alaric raised his pulse rifle, taking position behind one of the control panels. His hands were steady now, focused. He wasn't going to let them take this ship. He wasn't going to let them take his home. The doors to the bridge shook as the Dread Walkers tried to break through, their forces outside in full assault mode. Alaric's eyes flicked to Seraphis, who was poised and calm despite the chaos unfolding around them. She was ready for this, ready for the fight that would determine their survival. "On my mark," Seraphis said, her voice barely above a whisper. "When the shields are back online, we make our stand." The tension in the room was unbearable, the sound of pounding footsteps growing louder. The dread walkers were coming. They were only moments away. Suddenly, the doors to the bridge buckled under the sheer force of the mercenaries' assault, and the heavy blast doors gave way. A dozen dread walkers stormed into the room, their weapons raised and ready. Their armor was black as night, the insignia of their mercenary group glowing ominously on their shoulders. Alaric didn't hesitate. He fired first, the pulse rifle kicking against his shoulder with each shot. A dread walker went down instantly, his armor shattered by the high-powered blast. The rest of them reacted in unison, returning fire with deadly precision. Seraphis was already in motion, her weapon humming with deadly energy as she cut down another mercenary. The warrior beside her moved like a shadow, his blade flashing in the dim light, and in seconds, 2 more dread walkers were down. Alaric moved with purpose, firing again and again. His aim was sharp despite the exhaustion gnawing at him, and the dread walkers fell one by one. But there were too many of them. He could feel the tide of battle turning against them. "Hold the line!" Seraphis shouted over the chaos. Her voice was a command, and Alaric felt the surge of purpose that only came when a leader knew what had to be done. Another explosion rocked the ship, and the lights flickered. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze, the chaos outside stilling just long enough for them to realize the gravity of the situation. "Now!" Seraphis yelled. The shields flared to life with a sudden burst of energy, enveloping the bridge in a protective field. The dread walkers' shots ricocheted harmlessly off the barrier, and their eyes widened in realization. They were trapped. But just as the battle seemed to tip in their favor, the ship's main reactor began to hum loudly. The damage from the previous attacks had taken its toll, and the reactor was nearing critical failure. Seraphis's eyes flicked to the control panel. "We don't have long," she said, her voice cold. "We need to finish this." Alaric's heart pounded as he took his stance, feeling the finality of the moment. He wasn't just fighting for his life anymore. He was fighting for the future of humanity. With one final, decisive charge, they took down the remaining mercenaries, one by one, until only silence filled the room. The last of the dread walkers lay sprawled across the bridge, their armor battered and their weapons discarded. Alaric looked at Seraphis, his chest heaving, blood pounding in his ears. "Is it over?" Seraphis's gaze softened for the briefest of moments, but the fight wasn't over yet. The ship was on the verge of collapse, but they had made it. For now, they had survived. The battle was over,